All right, so get this. We're going deep into a case from India's Supreme Court, and it's got everything.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Like marriage, divorce, and domestic violence. Oh, and even international extradition. Wild, right?
Extradition. Wow, that's intense. Where'd you hear about all this?
So there's this legal news site, Law Trend, and they've got all the details. It's like a roller coaster.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, so basically you've got this couple, they get married back in 2018.
Okay.
They head off abroad together, but then things go south, like really fast.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, and it leads to this whole mess of lawsuits filed in courts all over India.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this gets complicated.
And here's where it gets even crazier. The husband ends up living in the U.S. And suddenly he's facing extradition.
Hey, what? Extradition? For what?
Because he can't physically show up for a domestic violence case his wife started in India?
Hold on, that doesn't seem right. How can they extradite him if he's in another country?
Well, that's what makes this whole thing so bizarre. See, the husband's passport, it got impounded by Indian authorities.
So he's stuck.
Yeah, pretty much. And to top it off, there's this magistrate in India who's pushing for his extradition.
So they want to force him to come back to India for this case.
Exactly. Yeah. Even though he's living in the U.S. and his passport is, well, gone.
That's wild. So what happened? Did they actually manage to extradite him?
Luckily, the Supreme Court stepped in.
Oh, good.
Yeah, they put a stop to the whole extradition order.
So they realized how ridiculous it was to demand he be there in person.
Right, especially when it wasn't even legally required.
Okay. So this is making me wonder, what does Indian law actually say about this whole thing?
You know why the Supreme Court was so against the extradition?
Yeah, like what's the legal basis for all this?
Well, that brings us to a really important piece of Indian law. It's called the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act, or, DV Act for short.
Okay, the DV Act. I've heard of that.
It's specifically designed to protect women from, well, different types of abuse. But here's the thing. It works a bit differently from your typical criminal proceedings.
So it's not like, facing assault charges or something.
Right. It's not quite that serious, but it's still really important. It provides serious protections for women.
So it's a special kind of legal process.
Exactly. And here's the kicker. With the DV Act, you don't automatically get hit with huge penalties like jail time or fines. Unless you violate a protection order from the court.
Ah, so that's the catch.
Yeah, so in this case, the husband, he wasn't facing any of those heavy charges.
So he hadn't actually done anything to warrant extradition.
Exactly. The Supreme Court made it crystal clear that unless someone disobeys a court order, they don't have to be physically present for DV Act cases.
Which the husband hadn't done.
Nope. So demanding he come all the way back to India, it was totally unnecessary.
And legally questionable, it sounds like.
Totally. So we've got this couple. Married for a minute, separated for years, and tangled up in this whole international legal web.
It's crazy how quickly things escalated. So what happened next? What did the Supreme Court do about the actual marriage?
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. The Supreme Court didn't stop at just the extradition. They actually tackled the whole marriage situation head on.
Oh, wow. They went there.
Oh, yeah. Remember how we said this couple barely lived together, only 80 days?
Yeah, and they'd been separated for a long time.
Over 5 years. So, faced with all this legal drama, the husband decides, hey, I want a divorce.
And I bet I know why.
Because of something called irretrievable breakdown of the marriage.
Irretrievable breakdown. So, they just didn't get along anymore.
Well, it's a bit more complicated than that.
It's got to be more than just saying we don't like each other.
It's like imagine a puzzle where the pieces just won't fit together no matter how hard you try.
Okay, I get the analogy.
It means the marriage has gotten so bad, there's zero hope of them getting back together. It's beyond repair.
So, is that even grounds for divorce in India?
Oh, and get this. In situations like this, the Indian Supreme Court can actually grant a divorce, even if the usual reasons for divorce, like adultery or cruelty, aren't totally there.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah, they have this power under Article 142 of the Constitution.
So, even if a couple's not separated for, a specific amount of time, the court can still say, you're done?
Yep. It shows how the Supreme Court recognizes that sometimes forcing a broken marriage to continue, it can do more harm than good.
Makes sense. So what did they look at to make their decision?
Well, they took into account things like how long the couple had been apart, if they tried to get back together, and just the overall state of their relationship.
And in this case, all signs pointed to irretrievably broken.
Totally. I mean, they barely lived together. They'd been separated for ages. And then there were all those legal battles.
So did the Supreme Court actually use this irretrievable breakdown thing to grant the divorce?
They did. Their final judgment. It was like a Swiss Army knife of legal solutions.
Okay, lay it on me.
First, boom, they toss out the extradition order.
Good riddance.
Right. Then they officially declared the marriage dissolved because, it was irretrievably broken.
Okay, so they dealt with the legal status of the marriage. What about the financial side of things?
Oh, they didn't forget about that. They awarded the wife a one-time alimony payment. A big one.
Oh, how big are we talking?
It's a whopping 25 lakh.
Whoa. And for us Americans who think in dollars, that's
about $300,000.
Not chump change.
Wow, that's a serious chunk of money. I'm curious, how do they even decide on an amount like that?
It's a great question, isn't it? What were they thinking? Unfortunately, the article we're looking at, it doesn't really dive into the specifics of how they got to that number.
That's a bummer.
But they did do a few other things.
Like what?
Well, they ordered the release of the husband's passport. Finally.
And they close all the other legal cases between the couple.
So like a clean break.
Exactly. The Supreme Court, they really wanted to wrap everything up nice and neat so both parties could move on.
It's kind of amazing, how this whole thing started as a seemingly straightforward domestic dispute.
And then it snowballed into this crazy international legal battle with a marriage ending because of, irretrievable breakdown.
Yeah.
I bet our listeners out there are like, what does this all mean?
It really highlights how family law is changing, especially now that everyone's so interconnected.
Yeah, with people moving across borders, different legal systems clashing. It's a whole new world.
This case really shows how powerful the Supreme Court is. They can interpret and apply laws in some pretty unique situations.
Right. And this whole idea of irretrievable breakdown as a valid reason for divorce, it's definitely something to watch.
Totally. Makes you wonder how this could change things for couples in the future.
Yeah, lots to think about. Okay, let's take a pause here. We've already covered so much.
A whirlwind marriage, domestic violence accusations, an extradition drama, and this whole concept of irretrievable breakdown. Phew.
But this is just the start of our deep dive. There's so much more to uncover. So stay tuned, because in the next part, we're going to explore even more fascinating aspects of this case and what it all means for you.
It's kind of wild how this case just shows how much family law is changing.
Yeah, totally. It really throws you off, thinking about divorce and all. We always hear about, adultery or cruelty, but this case...
Totally different.
It's like, sometimes things just don't work out right. No one's necessarily to blame.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, is this how people are starting to view marriage?
Like, maybe we're shifting away from pointing fingers when a marriage ends.
It's a thought, isn't it?
It is. And this irretrievable breakdown thing, it's a whole new way of looking at divorce. It makes you think, what about couples from different cultures? How do those differences play into it?
Oh, for sure. That's a whole other can of worms. Different cultures, different ideas about marriage,
Yeah. It's definitely a lot to think about. But before we get too far ahead, let's break down this irretrievable breakdown thing. What are the courts looking at? What makes them decide if a marriage is really over?
So, like we talked about, the time spent apart is a big one.
Yeah, but it's got to be more than just living separately.
Right. It's also about trying to fix things. Did the couple go to counseling? Did they try to work it out?
So if those attempts fail...
It's okay, maybe this is really it.
So it's not just physical distance, it's about the whole emotional and psychological state of the relationship.
Exactly. The court's going to look at how they communicate. Do they still care about each other, or is there any respect left?
And are they even willing to try to fix the problems?
That's key.
It seems like it could be kind of subjective, though.
Yeah, in a way it is, right? It comes down to how the judge sees the evidence.
So having a good lawyer, that's got to be crucial.
Absolutely. You need someone who can present a strong case, who can really highlight those factors that scream irretrievable breakdown.
It's not just filling out paperwork. It's about showing the court what's really going on in that marriage.
Convincing them that there's no coming back from this.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that this whole irretrievable breakdown idea is still kind of evolving. What are people saying about it? Are there any concerns?
Well, some folks are worried that it could make divorce too easy, what happens to the commitment of marriage if it's that simple to just walk away?
I could see that. Are we sacrificing that commitment for individual freedom?
That's the debate, right? It's a balancing act. And it'll probably keep going as our ideas about marriage and relationships change. But it's important to remember how the legal system in India works.
What do you mean?
It's based on common law, meaning that past court decisions, they carry a lot of weight.
So the Supreme Court case we're talking about, it could influence future cases.
Exactly. It sets a precedent. Lower courts are probably going to look at this and follow suit, at least in cases that are similar.
One case, that much impact. Wow. So staying up to date on legal stuff, that's super important, especially when it comes to things like family law.
No doubt. The law, it's not stuck in time, you know? It's always changing, adapting to how society changes.
And how we interpret those laws, too.
Right. And by staying aware of these changes, we can make better choices and protect our rights.
That's a good takeaway for our listeners. Let's do a quick recap. We've gone deep into international family law, explored this irretrievable breakdown idea, and seen how important precedents can be.
It's a lot, but we can't forget, behind all those legal arguments, there are real people going through some tough stuff.
So true. This wasn't just some abstract case. It was a couple whose relationship fell apart, and then all these international borders and different legal systems get thrown into the mix.
It's a reminder of how complicated things can get.
And it makes you wonder, right? Yeah. About the future of marriage and divorce in our globalized world.
It does. Lots of big questions still to answer.
Okay, let's take a break here. We've talked a lot about irretrievable breakdown and the twists and turns of international family law.
Yeah, we've really dug in.
But there's more to come. This case, it's got layers. So come back for the next part where we'll wrap up this deep dive and explore what this landmark Supreme Court decision really means. Welcome back, everyone. This case, it's really taken us on a journey.
It has. I mean, from this whirlwind international marriage to this crazy legal battle.
And you know, what strikes me is how much this one case says about, like, bigger changes happening in family law all over.
Like with irretrievable breakdown, it seems like it's becoming more and more of a thing.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes you wonder, are people's views on marriage shifting?
Like, is divorce becoming less about who's at fault?
Maybe. It's like we're recognizing that relationships can just, end.
And that's okay.
Right. This case also got me thinking about all the practical challenges when legal stuff crosses borders. We had courts all over India involved, plus the husband living in the U.S.
Yeah, talk about a headache. And it shows how important it is for different countries to have clear legal systems that work together,
Especially in a world where everyone's so connected.
Totally.
And imagine if you throw in cultural differences on top of that.
Oh, yeah. Different cultures, different ideas about marriage and divorce.
A new layer of complication.
Exactly.
This case might be about India specifically, but it raises some universal questions, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, how do we balance individual rights with the importance of marriage?
And how do we make sure divorce is fair, especially when there are financial differences between the couple?
Yeah, and how do you even navigate all the legal stuff when relationships go across borders?
Big questions. Tough questions.
No easy answers. But digging into this case, I think it's given us a lot to chew on. And hopefully our listeners too.
I think so.
We've gone from extradition to the changing definition of what it means for a marriage to really be over.
And this is just one piece of the puzzle, right? Family law, it's constantly changing, adapting to our lives.
What do you think is the most important thing our listeners should take away from all this?
Stay informed. I think that's crucial. The law affects everyone, whether we realize it or not.
Right.
So stay curious, ask questions, and try to see things from different angles. That's how we can make sense of it all.
Yeah. Great advice. Well, we've covered a lot in this deep dive, from extradition to this whole idea of irretrievable breakdown in marriage.
And there's so much more to discover out there.
For sure. But for now, this is where our deep dive into this case ends. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We hope you enjoyed the journey.